active member of the National Association of Black Psychologists, a board member of the National Afrocentric Institute at Temple University, and the executive board of the Associate for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. He told me to say whatever the Spirit moved me to say, and what I feel right now, by just briefly spending some time with the brother, I already know that he's a warrior. He's a fighter, a scholar, an academician, an initiator, a legislator, a regulator, a detonator, a stimulator, and I can already tell that the brother, if pushed, and if he has to get in a defense mode, he can also be a terminator.
It is amazing to watch the spirit of African people do things to African people that we know not what it is. And we should be careful, because we're going to look up and realize who we are and stop taking the mess. That's right. It is important that I share with you that there's a rumor going around that Malana Karinga gave me the topic in which I am to address you. And that's okay, because he's my brother. And if your brother is your Baba, you don't need a mirror. So whatever he has assigned me, I will try to step up to address. And I thought about this process today, and I realized the special genius of Brother Abercrombie, because he has orchestrated something that goes way back in time, to the point when Africans stood up and realized that they were conscious of being conscious. And in so doing, we began to orchestrate mastery of the spirit of the universe. And what my brother has done is what the ancients did. They looked at the natural, divinely governed universe and saw the laws and the processes of that rulership, and then mimicked it in the social constructions of reality. So what my brother has done is provide you with some dinner. It's called Naim Akbar. And Akbar fed you. And I was almost embarrassed because you were greedy. You act like you had no table manners. You just kept eating. And then as a good host, my brother Eric provided you with dessert. And Malana came and made you embarrass yourself, because you kept asking for more of the sweetness of the dessert. And in the customs of the African tradition, you always have a cool drink of water after you've had your dinner and your dessert. And I suspect that that's my role today, to provide you with a cool drink of water, because it is in that water that the digestive juices begin to work. And that which you have ingested, you begin to digest. And in digesting it, you internalize it, and it becomes part of you. That, I think, is my task. Or maybe it is to put some hot sauce on what was already given. It is my custom that whenever I begin to speak, and especially to those of my own people, that I have to make the moment sacred, because it is in our spirituality that we as African people understand the truth of all things. And I have done that by adopting as my custom to begin my formal remarks by asking all of you to allow me to assume a posture of reverence and respect while I give praise and credit to the source of all knowledge and all things. And I do that by saying out loud. And it's important that you say things out loud if you understand the power of Nomo. So in saying out loud, I ask you to recognize that the Almighty, who is sometimes called Amun, and is sometimes called Aset, and is sometimes called Ptah, and is sometimes called Seshai, and is sometimes called Jehovah, and is sometimes called Obatula, and is sometimes called the Christ, and is sometimes called Oshun, and is sometimes called Shango, and is sometimes called Allah, and is sometimes called Oya, and is sometimes called Olutumari, and is sometimes called Atum, that Almighty God, Amun, Ptah, Ra, although hidden, is the source of all knowledge, all truth, and all wisdom. And I pray in what I share with you today that Amun, Tehuti, Orumila will be satisfied. It is important that we invoke the spirit of the divine, because in invoking that spirit we manipulate the natural laws of the universe that the Dogon and the Bantu and the Akan understood were at our service. Because just as that young group of voices made that traditional joyful noise unto God in this room, we transformed the energy in this place. So I must warn you, because as a psychologist I would be engaging in malpractice if I didn't. Now's the time to leave if you don't want to be infected with the spirit of Africa. Now's the time to say you have to go, because that energy is real. It is real, and what I intend to do is to share with you a couple of things, trying to be obedient to my brother Malana. I will talk about the psychology of social change and suggest to you that we need to understand very critically a process that I am calling psychocultural rearrangement. And I will explain to you what that means and understand the process of the creation of the Negro in that psychocultural rearrangement. Because if we understand divine process, if we understand that every product comes from a process, we can return the process back to what it originally was and not be victimized by our arrangement. I will also try to share with you the challenges of the radical reform of black men. And in that radical reformation of black men, we are essentially talking about the radical reformation of the black mind, because it is in the mind that our manhood ultimately is expressed. I have done very little in the field of African psychology, but the one thing that I appreciate that came through me, because the ancestors speak to you and through you. And the one thing that I am glad was spoke to me and then through me was the definition of power. Because that definition is so critical that we need to put it on the walls of our nurseries, so that as our children mature and begin to play with their fingers, to understand their self-divination, even though they cannot read, the formation of the letters of that definition is inscribed in the kiss on the honey of the knowledge that we give them. Power is the ability to define reality and to have other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. It is critical for African people to understand that reality is neutral. It is only when we stand up and define our reality do at the same time we cause an adjustment in those who see us as deviant defining their reality. We must recognize that African people are the definers of human destiny. That's our destiny. We are the definers of human destiny. We take no second seat to anyone in that position. It is not an arrogant position. It is simply something that has been ascribed by divine law. And we need to recognize that and in all humility engage in that. Sometimes that translates politically to mean that we must reascend to our position as rulers and caretakers of the divinely governed universe. That's why we make commentary. That's why we make the announcements. That's why we have the challenges to inhumanity in the world. No other people bothers to stand up and give authentic voice to human degradation. It is not because we are victimized and therefore have authentic pain and should be saying we are in pain. It is because we are the chosen people. We are the ones who are responsible for the divinely governed universe. And we see that in two preambles that I want to share with you in hope that if I don't get through all of what I plan to get through, you will at least have what I consider the preface and therefore the most important piece. In the book of Wise Instructions, Malana has taught us in the Kusiya that the Pharaoh Keti, in teaching his son, an important moment, in teaching one's son, you take responsibility for your own future. In fact, for a future that you are not prepared to deal with. Isn't that an amazing equation? That in teaching a son, you are giving that son the skills to address issues that you cannot handle because you know nothing of them. They're in a time where you will not see. And the Pharaoh Keti tells his son, righteousness is fitting for the ruler. That's who we are, black men. We are the rulers. We don't know it. We've forgotten it. We've been convinced because of the process that we're not that we are the beggars and the debtors of humanity. But in fact, the matter is that we are the rulers. And you need to not jump up and say, I'm a ruler and run away now, because you have to believe in the power of definition. Don't go around saying you're a ruler until you define what a ruler is. Because it may just be a stick with some marks on it that's laid down on the ground to determine the distance of other people's progress. So be careful in terms of these issues. That's why I say what we're doing here today is dangerous stuff. And we get excited and we get happy and we get energized. But be careful, because this is business for adults. It is not for children. Children play and get happy in the song. It is the adult who understands the meter and the rhythm and the tenth of the music. It is our task to make that kind of analysis. Keti tells us that righteousness is fitting for the ruler. Do therefore that which is right, because it is right to do right. Do there that which is right, because it is right to do right, and in doing right that you may live long on the earth. More acceptable is the bread of the righteous than the ox of those who do evil. That's what Malana was talking about in terms of reparations when we look at the issue of, are we asking for reparations about material money, or are we asking for reparations that have to do with the bread of the righteousness? Follow in the footsteps of your ancestors, Keti says, for the mind is trained through knowledge. Behold, their words endure in books. Not the griot. The griot is important. But our words endure in books. That's why our ancestors wrote on everything. Yes, we are an oral people, but our ancestors wrote on everything. They wrote on the floors, they wrote on the walls, they wrote on the ceilings, they wrote on sandals, they wrote on rings, they wrote on spoons, because they knew if you were going to walk, you had to read. If you were going to eat, you must know the knowledge that we pass on to the next generation. So reading and writing were important parts of the enduring of our people. Behold, their words endure in books. We need to put a book in every infant's arms soon after they are from their mother's womb. They need to know that this is integral to who they are. Open and read them. Don't do like some bloods do, which is just get the books and walk around with the Afrocentric book under their arm and say, I got so-and-so and I'm doing this, and just fronting off for the sisters and haven't even read the book. The most compliment you can give to a scholar is to show him or her his book, and the book be torn and tattered from use. It is not to be clean and sterile and just be on your shelf. For one who is taught becomes skilled. Do not be evil, for kindness is good. Make the memory of you last through love of you. Make the memory of you last through love of you. Multiply the people whom the city shelters, then God would be praised for your donations. And the people will give thanks for your goodness and pray for your health. And Nana Prasan, in Daughters of the Dust tells us the same thing. She says, Eli, the ancestors and the womb, they are one and the same. The ancestors and the womb, they are one and the same. So as we reach back to the ancestors, we in fact are giving birth to the new. It is not romanticism going back to find out when bloods had done something good so we can play the dozens with those people who talk about us. It is recognizing that our past and our future are one. If we have no past, we have no future. If we have no ancestors, we have no womb. We have something else that begins with a P, that has no value other than to be exploited. Understand power is the ability to define reality. The second preamble that's important is for us to recognize is that by claiming and affirming our cultural essence, let me say that again. By claiming and affirming our cultural essence, we learn to draw upon a source of energy, of power, of spirit that enhances our spiritual, mental, and physical well-being, and in so doing guarantees our human liberation. So you have to affirm, you have to claim your cultural essence, otherwise you aren't even in the arena of what is about human liberation and ascension. You can only be the carbon copy of someone else's humanity. And given the fact that we, in fact, are the template for humanity, if we are the carbon copy of someone that is not us, then we are something that is not real. We must look at authenticity. It is the psychology of social change that becomes critical for this analysis because it allows us to see these dynamics that we haven't thought about, I believe, as clearly as we should. And the first aspect of the psychology of social change for African people has to be white supremacy. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about white supremacy because you all know and love it well. In fact, many black folks are the best white supremacists around. And so we understand white supremacy. So I won't talk about it a lot, but I do need to point out to you just for the record that white supremacy is the direct and indirect subjugation of all non-white people by white people for the singular and sole purpose of pleasing and or serving the interests of white people. We have to recognize that that's what white supremacy is. It's not about someone walking around with a baseball bat and talking about black kids can't come to this school, or walking around saying stay out of my store because you know you're going to steal. White supremacy is a systematic process that is designed to say the value of African people is to the extent that they, in what they do and in how we be, represent and please and serve the interests of white people in every activity of human development. I don't care whether it's economics, whether it's education, whether it's entertainment, whether it's labor, whether it's law, whether it's politics, whether it's war, or whether it is even sex. That every aspect of this society defines us in terms of whether or not, defines our value in terms of whether or not we are pleasing and profitable to the interests and the pleasure of white people. And if you don't believe that, recognize, please, as you go away from this conference, that today in the United States, there are 346 recorded, organized, established white supremacy groups operating in this country. That's a statistic that's important. 346 organized white supremacist organizations in this country. That means the black man could literally deal with a different white supremacist organization every single day of the year. Understand what the concrete conditions that we're dealing with. And all of them are orchestrated to do what? To guarantee the dehumanization of the African spirit. It is important that we recognize that if you don't understand white supremacy, everything else that you think you know will confuse you. If you don't understand white supremacy, that everything else that you think you know will confuse you, because it is about the exploitation of the land, the labor, and the life of African people. We recognize, and we should keep in our authentic voice, that African people were the only people who came to America due to and expressly for the singular purpose of human exploitation and dehumanization. We didn't come on no Love Boat. We didn't come on no, I went to the New World and I sent home to Mommy and Daddy and asked them to send me some money because I thought I would extend my vacation. We didn't come here because we got lost in the wilderness and 40 days decided we were going to lay down our buckets and turn down our roots. We came here because a people decided that we were to be taken advantage of. And we who sit in this room, let's recognize that if we do anything in this life, we must recognize that we cannot compromise with those whose original and permanent interest is the destruction of our humanity. We cannot compromise. It is a hard task because sometimes we begin to feel comfortable. It's a hard task to say, I am not participating in my own dehumanization when I get accolades and I get the spotlight and I get the awards for being a good, exceptional, colored person. It is hard to recognize when we compromise with our own dehumanization without analysis. And it is our task as eldership, those of us in this room as eldership, to make sure that the next generation has an analysis that allows them to understand when they are, in fact, participating in their own dehumanization. And I suggest that that analysis has to do with the colonialization of African beingness. African beingness. See, colonialization, remember power is the ability to find reality? So I must obviously always try to define those key concepts that I think are important. Otherwise, I'd be derelict in my responsibility as a teacher. So please allow me not to be arrogant, but simply to teach. Colonialism basically means organization and arrangement. And the singular goal of colonialization is always to rearrange the area and the resources of that which you conquer into something different. See, colonialization is not just about political exploitation of a subject people. Colonialization is the rearrangement of the area or the resources or the beingness of something that you conquered into something different. And history teaches us that Europe's contact with Africa has always been driven by the desire to transform, to rearrange things African into fundamentally European constructs. That's important to recognize because in the rearrangement process, we become palatable. And I mean that in several ways. We become palatable to European taste only to the extent that we have been rearranged to be European. And in the vampire model, once we are palatable, then we are easily consumed by that which has a taste for us. See, Africans aren't tasty, except for people like Jeffrey Dahmer, but that's a sick aside. That's a sick aside. But recognize that there is no interest in African people as African people. That we must be transformed. And it is without an understanding of the culture which frames the behavior and mentalities of black people, we are never able to see clearly this transformation process. It is, in fact, done in three different ways. First, colonialization engages in the domination of physical space. That's why you see a certain kind of fabric in the African American community. Wherever you go, it doesn't matter where you go in this country, for that matter in the world, you're going to see a certain quality of the environmental condition in those communities defined as African people. Because colonialization requires the domination of the physical space. It means that anything that happens in that space has to happen by acquiring, distributing, and exploiting the resources to the benefit of the European community. One can look at health issues and ask about the creation of disease as a way of rearranging the essence of what it is to be African people. One does not need to look at and even raise the hypothesis that if a people can create syphilis experiments to look at what happens in the African community when syphilis is allowed to run wild, those same people must have a nature that will allow them to create AIDS and ask the same question. It is about the business of dominating the physical space because if we are concentrating on our physical being and only can deal at that level, we never rise up to the divinity that is ours, because we must maintain ourselves only in terms of the physical issues of reality. The second aspect of colonization that is important to point out in this analysis is that colonization requires that you take charge of managing the indigenous modes of production. Now, that's a labor question in terms of the political analysis, but in terms of the psychological analysis, it has to do with the development of children. That you take charge of the modes of indigenous production. So when your grandmama and your mama knew how to raise children with meager resources, and knew how to look at a child and understand what their skills and their talents were, and knew how to orchestrate so that she brought out the best of that child, we now tell that grandmother's granddaughter that if she doesn't understand Dr. Spock, if she doesn't understand some other white psychologist or sociologist who has never, in some instances, even raised a white child, that we should follow them. And so we change our modes of indigenous production, not to looking at the spirit and the energy that is in that child and the gifts that God has inscribed in that child to bring them out. We change our modes of production and believe that we must engage in child rearing if we are to be proper parents the way other people raise their children. We miseducate our own children through our miseducation. We have to look at the modes of indigenous production in the African tradition if we are to rearrange the rearrangement. And the final mode of colonization is the reformation of the mind, the most serious of all three. It is the reformation of the mind that you attack the life essence of a people. You replace the African indigenous educational, religious, familial, and psychological systems with non-African systems. And they teach us to look at gods not our own, to look at education not our own, to look at family dynamics not our own. And we begin to wonder and internalize the foolish analysis that if we are not like Ozzy, and my wife is not like Harriet, and my children don't do like Ricky and Dave, then something's wrong with my family. We begin to wonder, why is it that Grandma and Big Mama and Ma and Ma dear are there when my wife should be coming out with an apron and a fling of pearls around her neck washing dishes. We begin to say that abnormality is normality. And that abnormality is something I must strive for. And so when my wife tells me that we both are working and whoever gets home first starts to cook, I say, but I'm a black man and men don't cook. Fool, you have been rearranged. You have been rearranged. You have been rearranged in a systematic process that if we understood how thorough it was, we would begin to break the mold. Let me give you an example. The same process of colonialization, of rearranging the African being that we have been victimized, is the exact same process that Europeans teach sheepdogs to care more about the sheep than they care about their mother. It is systematic. The first thing you do with the puppy sheepdog is you have the sheepdog literally suckle at the tip of the sheep. And in that baby puppy's mind, that sheep represents the essential, necessary ingredient to its survival. Then you have the sheepdog, as it gets to be almost an adolescent in dog years, begin to bond with the sheep. You literally place the dog's face to the face of the sheep. So the dog gets the image that the sheep symbolically represents that which is beautiful and most good. And then the third stage is you have the sheep puppy to fight and to kill other sheepdogs that are let in the area of its domain in anticipation that you, in a very psychological way, condition the dog to believe that that sheep's destiny is more important than their destiny. In a vulgar way, you could say that's the Clarence Thomas process. In a vulgar way, you can say that if the Clarences of the world suckled at the titty of white nurturance, then bonded through the educational process of Eurocentric education, and then turn and believe that black people are their enemy, they have become the sheepdogs of the modern world. They have been rearranged. They have been rearranged. It is important to recognize that rearrangement is critical, almost in the kind of movies we see on television where something gets inside of you and your body. The special effects people go wild when they have stuff popping out your body and having your hands bubbling like they're with boiling water. That's the rearrangement that African men are going through. It is the rearrangement that says your destiny is tied most closely to that which suckles you. That which suckles you. It is the tip of capitalism that has enticed us, has induced us to believe that our enemy is other black men. That our enemy is other black men. And when they come in the arena of that which is most sacred, the female sheep, the only thing we are allowed to do and must do is to destroy them. And the sheep recognizes that once that good sheepdog does that, then that sheepdog is allowed to breed with other sheepdogs, to create a class of sheepdogs that don't need such intense training. They just need to be allowed to go to Stanford University or University of Cincinnati or Berkeley or Yale or Harvard, and they desire to get there because in getting there they understand that they are in fact proudly sheepdogs. Sheep before the dog. Sheepdogs. They are proud to be sheepdog, and we, many of us, run around being proud to be Americans, conservatives, neo-whatever, in the name of suckling at the breast of white America. This is not accidental. These issues are not accidental. We should understand, as Malcolm taught us, that history is most rewarding for the effort that we place. And when we look at history, we realize that the negative image and the societal projections of the negative features of black men were not always the historical moment. That there was historical contact between Africa and the West that introduced some issues that we have to understand and break down. It was the contact that was philosophical that became the basis of this political racism. See, we need to recognize that literally from the beginning of human consciousness, the relationship between Africa and non-African people was the opposite that it is now. Hear me say that again. From the beginning of human consciousness, when the being called humanity understood it was human, from that moment to very recently, the whole world saw Africa as the light and the model and the template of humanity. It was the opposite that it was now, and there was an important psychological, psychosocial shift that had to occur in order to see the African in the light that it is in. It was the historical consciousness of European community that viewed the African, not the Negro, viewed the African as associated with high culture, superior civilization, sophisticated systems of social organization that needed to be borrowed and mimicked and duplicated in their own places. It was from the time of the Ionian philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, the gang of affirmative action children. And you all do appreciate that they were affirmative action children. That it was our mystery systems that were the template for human university, and it was our benevolence that said these young people are people. One could judge the classification, but we can't second guess that. He said, these young people are people, and we must embrace them and teach them the best that we can, even though they have not the qualifications for admissions. So we created an affirmative action program and allowed Plato, allowed Aristotle, allowed Socrates to come and learn the secrets of the mysteries, learn the secrets of our societies. And they took that information and went back, but somehow in their essence, and we're probably responsible for this, because we didn't teach them well. Somehow somehow in the teaching of what it is to be enlightened, they went back and rather than say, I was taught by the black masters of the universe, they started saying, well, I wrote this, and I thought about this, and I conceptualized this. And they began to put their name on things that they had no ownership of. Right. The affirmative action children began to change, to rearrange the historical order of intellectual excellence. They began to look at that, and the Ionian philosophers passed that on, the same kind of deceit, onto the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. Isn't that a contradiction of terms? Holy Roman Empire? How can one be holy in an empire at the same time? How can one be holy and imperialist at the same time? But again, it's probably our fault. Somehow we didn't realize that there needed to be tutorial. There needed to be some mentoring one-on-one. There needed to be some intervention with these young people who are coming to our systems to learn what it is. And what they did in terms of the moment they found is that they saw the Ethiope, the Blackamoor, the Nubian, the African, all representing in the minds of the European a people and a culture that was superior and praiseworthy and had to be rearranged. Had to be rearranged. And so the psychological requisite for European domination, what we suffer from today, was the destruction of African civilization and African claim to history and the foundation of humanity. Europe had to redefine the African. Europe had to rearrange the meaning of what it was to be African into a different mentality, a different attitude, a different set of behaviors and beliefs that allowed us not to believe that there was a connection in what we do today, 1993, and what Imhotep did as he sat on the side of the valley of the Nile River. We don't see the connection, and therefore we don't understand. And then later they begin to and it's important that you all as students begin to explore these things. They begin to write this stuff up. Say, hey, we're gonna take over this stuff. It's just like thuggery. It's like gangstery. We're gonna take it over. So what we'll do is we'll just write up some stuff that says it's us. So they begin to write major pieces. The Imperium Christianum. Major document that talks about how it is important for this new politicized Christianity, not the word of Christ, not the history of Christ, but a politicized Christianity to take over the world. They begin to write about the Regnum Europae, the rulership of Europe, laid out step by step how Europe was going to take over the world and provide a new interpretation of history and human consciousness based upon centering Europe in the world. We didn't understand that. We didn't understand that what we taught them in ancient Kemet was that human beings could exist in one of two states. You could exist in a state of ignorance, or you could exist in a state of enlightenment. And the task of development, the task of education, is to move from that state of ignorance to the higher state of enlightenment. But what the Greek affirmative action children took with that was not that there was this ignorant state and enlightenment state, but that there was a literal polarity of ignorance and enlightenment that was as metaphor symbolized by the darkness and the light, and then later colorized by the symbols of black and white. So where we talked about, it is in fact recognized that there is a domain of darkness or a domain of ignorance that as human beings we move out of. Europe took that same notion and misunderstood it, the danger of lowering your standards for affirmative action purposes, and misinterpreted it and said there's not these domains of ignorance and enlightenment. There are linear polarities in the world of ignorance and enlightenment, of darkness and whiteness or lightness, of black and white. And that all these things in the world manifest themselves as linear polarities of opposite positions. So Europe began to place everything there. Black and white, woman and man, young and old, good, evil, and good. Everything became part of a linear polarity, and it was based upon the misunderstanding of the African tradition. And as a consequence of that, we enter the New World with a philosophical system of racism that says in order to keep the rearrangement of African people intact, we must engage in 2 or 3 important processes. First, we must engage in the systematic destruction of the African family. Because if we can destroy the African family, then we can place it in its natural order, what they believe to be the natural order of inferior and superior social systems. And so people went around talking about the black family is a deviant system of social organization, the black family, the pathological system of social organization, the black family is a victimized system. They came up with every kind of theory they could that said that the difference you see in these African people was not because there was difference, but that difference represented a deviation, and that deviation was clearly placed on this linear polarity of inferior and superior positions. And so what your mama did was not reviewed as something that is applicable to the development of the next generation of human beings. Your mama, whatever she did, was viewed as some inferior version of what white mothers do. And we went for it. We said, okay. So we went running around trying to find out what white folks did. The analogy is so absurd. It's almost like the cartoon of the enslaved African creeping up at night into the big house, the master's quarters, and peeking through the Venetian blinds and seeing what white folks did, and then scurry down to the slave quarters and try to mimic that. But based on the fact that the window was captured by a Venetian blind, and the slats in the blinds distorted the image of what you saw inside the big house, you took down a distorted message. And the distorted message is what you adopted as your family system. They want us to believe that. Right. They didn't want us to believe that as we passed through the Middle Passage, we brought with us our culture in our minds. See, be careful with the analysis. You don't lose your culture. You don't lose your culture. At best, it becomes dormant because the opportunity of the moment doesn't allow for its expression. You never lose your culture. It is foolish. It's like we're on the slave ship walking around, getting some air and being exercised, and maybe every now and then because we're walking too slow, we say, oh, shit, I just dropped my culture. It's like you drop it out your pocket, like your pocket watch. And once you drop your culture, you say, oh, shit, I ain't got no culture. I got to go find someone else's culture. So I run around, try to find white folks and see what they do. And then the black man starts walking like, talking like, looking like, acting like, being like something that is not of his own nature. So we need to recognize that the destruction of the African family or African peoplehood was intentional and purposeful. It was tied to the necessity of the rearrangement of African beingness. And the second factor that was important was the deconstruction of the African man. Now, please don't engage me in the debate of whether or not the dehumanization of African women is worse or better than the dehumanization of African men, because that's a foolish analysis. It's a foolish analysis. But for the purpose of this moment in this conference, we clearly can talk about the deconstruction of the African man, because in the divinely governed universe, there was a recognition that there was a complementarity of the male principle and the female principle, but in the mentality of the European, who did not have that complementarity, their attack on our beingness was targeted at men because they were not only racist, they were also sexist in terms of the belief that the man was the critical component of social organization. So they targeted their attack at that which they believed was the central component of African beingness. They didn't understand that we operated from a totally different philosophical system, and that's why they didn't wipe us out. That even though they attacked the black man, it was the centrality of the feminine principle in the African tradition that allowed us to do things that they would not have been able to do in the same crises of exploitation. The sister was able to stand up and say, I'm going to take charge. I'm going to do this because my man needs me. Now, that was nothing that was some Aunt Jemima stuff that started back in slavery. That was something that happened in the mythology of our consciousness way back when we first conceptualized the drama of Osiris of Osiris in our city. Do you realize that that drama is so important for us to critically understand? That Europeans try to tell us that it's a drama of sibling rivalry, that Osiris and Seth got to doing some crazy stuff together, and Seth kicked his butt and cut his butt up all over the place, and these black men, they wouldn't say black men though, but they said these men were fighting and had rivalry with each other. They didn't understand the analysis of the mythology, because the mythology represents a template of your human consciousness, a dramatization of consciousness. And in that myth, our ancestors were telling us a message that I'm going to share with you in a moment that is critical to see the natural role of black men and women. But they attack the black man, and then thirdly, they attack or try to delegitimize our language and our communication systems. The first communication system being the drum, because the drum represents the heartbeat. When these sisters, these young men and women were playing, and the folk over there, it was the rhythm of the drum that excited you. I don't even know geniuses who recognize that. Now I'm going to have to go back and do some heavy psychological analysis to figure that out. That it is the drum that represents the heartbeat that stimulates the spirit and the energy of humanity. It makes sense, therefore, don't give them blood those drums. They can have anything they want with slavery, but don't give them no drum, because in the drum, we stop being Igbo. We stop being Fulani. We stop being Ga. We stop being Oshogo. We stop being those, in quote, tribal affiliations that may have different dialects and may have even different material customs. It was in the beat that we understood we were one. So you had to disqualify the beat, to delegitimize the language. You had to destroy African people from speaking their own indigenous tongue. Because in the indigenous tongue, if we're together, we can say in our indigenous tongue, hey, there's 5 of us. This ain't hard to figure out. There's 5 of us, and there's only one of him, and his old lady thinks she's a queen and won't pick up a stick. We can do something about this. But by separating us out, then we were not able to make that quick analysis. The quick analysis about our condition, and we begin to engage in believing that we were, in fact, better and benefited more because we suckled at the tip of the plantation owner. We believed, and we began to be transformed and rearranged. It was in the African society that the role of the man was prescribed as the protector and the provider of life. That's right. And at the same time, only with different tasks. The black woman's meaning was to be the protector and the provider of life. See, the task, the purpose was exactly the same between black men and black women. The tasks we performed were different. And we get confused thinking that the task is what makes us a man or makes us a woman. Well, it's not the task, it is the fulfillment of the purpose. It is the fulfillment of the purpose that we have to engage in. And so this process of rearrangement resulted in us being dominated and transformed in ways that we ended up having the symptoms that we see today. Depression. It is sad. You feel sad when you're not around black folk. Yes, sir. We tell the truth. We tell the truth. That there's a direct correlation. There's a direct correlation with the onset of depression based upon the extent and the intensity of black folk in your environment. When you work it every single day at places like this and you ain't got but 2 or 3 black folk around, you leave on Friday night looking for black people. Looking for black people. Because you are trying to find, even though we psychologists haven't provided you with this analysis, you look for the antidote to depression. And the antidote to depression is other black folk being black. So you either go to the bar, will we be black, or you go to church, will we be black. But at IBM, we can't be black. And so we feel depressed. That's a consequence of this rearrangement. There's an alienation that comes from the rearrangement. And I think both Naeem and Milana spoke to the issue of alienation, where you see other black people, and because of the rearrangement, you don't want to be endangered by being near other black people. There's only 2 tits. And so you are concerned that if there's more than 2 of you somebody ain't going to be nurtured. That's the rearrangement. That's the rearrangement. So we begin to try to figure out through alienation how to get rid of the excess black man. So we allow them to define the black man as excess. We allow them to define our young sons as the crack dealers and the dope dealers and the criminals. We allow them to educate us not as education and socialization, but as criminalization. That we allow them to teach our young men, and we sit in silence because we're ashamed of the fact that we know in the deep recesses of our minds that we've been rearranged. Instinctually we know that, but it is cowardice that we don't stand up and say, I'm not going to allow myself to be rearranged. Right. It is not blind, it's not hidden. We know we're being rearranged. We know when we start mouthing all those foolishness about, well, it's my job, and if I don't do this, I got 5 kids to feed, and I got grandchildren. All that stuff is true. But our ancestors had 5 children and looked up and said, we're going to build the pyramids. Our ancestors had 5 children, looked up in the sky and saw the Sirius B star with their naked eyes when no one else could see it until they invented the telescope. Our ancestors had 5 children when they began to engage in philosophical thought and began to talk about mastering the universe and understanding our role in nature. It is only in alienation that we begin to not see the vision of who we are. Come on. We see the psychological consequence in terms of self-negation. We self-negate ourselves. Milana talked about it. The issue of the I don't know what the name of those, the Def Jam, the issue of the Def Jam comedy, it is a clear example of rearrangement. And not only is it rearrangement, the psychocultural rearrangement has a companion process called the acclimation to dehumanization. That's like being in the bathroom. And you're sitting on the toilet. And the first plop, you smell it. By the third plop, you don't smell it anymore. You have acclimated to the environment. And when the people have acclimated to their own dehumanization, they cannot perceive their own vulgarity. They cannot perceive the stink of their own pronouncements. These young people who are doing this kind of crazy degradation don't see it just as a way to make some money because that's what the market is buying. They believe it is normal. They believe that's the odor they should ingest. They believe that vulgarity is the sweet smell of freedom. Think about it. African people have been struggling for freedom in this country from the moment we were captured. And now that we have been rearranged, someone defines that your freedom means that you can do that which is not right. And so we engage in all kinds of aberrant behavior. We do all kinds of things in the name of the acclimation to our own dehumanization. We can't smell the funk of that which we produce anymore. We can't distinguish between the nurturance of the fine food on our mother's table, that's ancient Egypt, and the defecation that comes out of the digestive process that is America. Understand these processes, because if you understand the process of rearrangement, then we can begin to engage in an analysis that allows us to talk about a way to open the window so that when you are in the bowels of the bathroom, it is the fresh air of your Africanity that tells you this vulgar smell is necessary because I am eliminating that which does not nurture me anymore. This is our task. This is the task of the psychologist. Our task of the psychologist is to open the window. The task of the psychologist is to say, no, this is not what you breathe. This is a moment, the fresh air, the fresh water is what you need. We need to recognize that it is that ambivalence that comes from the rearrangement that causes the African community to tolerate all kinds of ambivalent issues around identity. We will be anything and everything in the moment. We will become the best whatever is the abnormality of this bathroom. and take pride in it. So if there are going to be black people who think that the color of our skin is a badge of our degradation, then we become the best Creoles in the world. We be walking around talking about you. If you light, you all right. If you white, you all right. If you brown, stick around. If you black, jump back. And we be making the black folk jump back far from us, like we the better because we a little bit lighter. That's acclamation. That's personal ambivalence. We become the folk who begin to tolerate the violation of divine law that says the male principle and the female principle by God's will is a complementary. And that it is in our complementarity that we produce the new. It ain't male. That's right. It ain't female. It ain't human dog. There's some law here. There's some law here that is divine that we have to recognize belongs to our tradition. And if we are to be who we are, we must open the window. We must open the window and begin to reject those kinds of things. When you look at this ambivalence that we psychologists are struggling with every single day, ambivalence about who you are. Are we black? Poor Michael Jackson. Am I white? Am I black? I don't know. It's all right anyway. He just goes all over the place. Having gone through is a good example, and we should love the genius of this young man, but he's a good example of the horror of the rearrangement process. Here's a young man whose gifts from God were so great that his talent allowed him to acquire capital that equaled in years $1 million for every year that he lived. Well, when he turned 21, he made a business deal that allowed him to get on one record $21 million. Now, how many black men can say, I am making $1,000 for every year that I have lived? $100, $2. But with all that material, with all that understanding, the rearrangement process allowed him to believe that his goodness would only be reflected when he looked in his own mirror. This young man needs to be analyzed and written up as a case. Because, not because we're superior to him, but because there's so much you can learn from this destructive process. He speaks instinctually to the very processes that are destroying him. He talks about the man in the mirror. But the image in that mirror is something that he is so frightened of based upon the rearrangement that he chops off his nose and cuts off his lips. But he is telling us that it is the mirror that we need to see. Because if we can see ourselves, we can have a template of our own normality. It is the genius of Michael that we need to look at, and not the foolishness, because the rearrangement process creates foolishness in us all. All of us do it. All of us get all, compromise. We got to do this or do that, and we change up. When we're the black man think tank, we down with the brothers, and we hardcore black man. And then we go down across the street and looking for a job, and we soak it up. We stiffen it up. We tighten our behinds and walk stiff and try to pretend we're somebody else. We all do it, so we can't sit here in smugness and say Michael Jackson's the problem. We all as black men. All of us do it. But it is only through analysis that we're able to break out the process. It's only through the analysis. We had done the analysis, possibly somebody who was counseling Michael Jackson could have said, Blood, look at this. This is the arrangement here. This is intentional. You don't need to look like Diana Ross because you like her. There's another natural way that black men and black women relate to each other. You need to understand that, and even though there's an age difference, go for it, Blood. You might have a chance here. We understand that it is through the counseling. It is through the counseling of the psychologist. Now, I'm not talking about those like us who got a little degree in psychology. I'm talking about psychologists. Those who study and understand the illumination of the Spirit. That's the psychologist. Study and understand the illumination of the Spirit. It is when we master and understand the illumination of the Spirit that we can begin to write prescription. That's right. Write prescription for the black man and engage in the radical transformation through divine law and moral mandate. Yes, sir. That's our scripture. The second point I want to make is that it is not only psychology that is the tool here. It is also theology. Theology. Don't let me make you think you get to run now and get your degree in theology, because I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about theos. or God force, and the study of the God force being theology, and it is an analysis of the study of the God force that we're able to explain the various aspects of the Godhead that manifests itself in our power.
Yes, sir.
Let me try that again, because sometimes, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Theology is important because theology is the theory that explains the various aspects of the God force that manifests itself as our power. See, the ancients stood up and recognized that they were God. They weren't ego-tripping saying, we God on earth. They would even say, we divine kings, and therefore you got to obey me. They recognized through their study of theology that the aspects of the God force manifested themselves through their power. And it was through their power that we conceptualized the pyramid.
Yes, sir.
And once we thought it, we produced it.
All right.
It is when we think of ourselves in a certain way, we are able to be a different way. As long as we allow other people to define us as less than we are, we will always be in Milana's point, the reactionary mode. It is theology that allows us to recognize and to see that the theology of a community assumes the truth of its reality at the moment that that community is born. Mm-hmm. So do we start in slavery?
No, sir.
Was that when you were born?
No, sir.
Did we start in 1946? Is that when you were born? Do you start in 1903? Was that when you were born? No. When do we begin to find the moment of our theology? I submit to you that the ancients teach us that our time was the time before there was time.
Yes, sir.
That's our beginning. That's our beginning. And it is the beginning of that point that our ancestors begin to talk about divine law. And they essentially wrote in the brick. I think it's prophetic that our ancestors chose as the material for their documentation brick. Because they knew that one day their children were going to get lost. And you ain't going to erase this. Because when children get lost, they look for security. And where they find that security is at their mama's kitchen table.
Well,
you always go home. And the African scholar has finally moved back to the Nile Valley because that's our mama's kitchen table. And on that kitchen table, our fathers wrote in brick about the law that we should reinterpret and inscribe and reclaim for our condition today. They wrote that there's a divine law, and that divine law, with all its elaborate philosophical pronouncements, boils down to a simple fact, and that is that you be.
Halala.
That's the divine law. Yep. You be. To be is the divine law, and in being we become the creative cause of reality. Yep. So we lost that. The rearrangement made us believe that it was a negotiation, it was a contract, it was a reaction. And not realizing, as we see every single day, when the black man steps out on the corner and be, other people tremble.
Yes, sir.
Other people get so afraid they engage in the Rodney King kind of beating. I mean, think about that. Once you knock blood down, when Muhammad Ali knocked you down, he just say, hey, will you give for some more? I mean, he gives you a chance to think about it. You just get your ass kicked. I mean, that's what a human does. That's what a black man does. Okay, now let's talk about it. But if you are frightened by the beingness of somebody, there is only one thing you can do.
That's right.
Eliminate their being. Eliminate their being. You can't just control it. You got to eliminate it. And so the African culture, our African philosophy says that the divine law is the be, because in being, you are the creative cause, and being the creative cause, that is what makes you divine. We create the moment. We forget it because we've been rearranged. We forget it because we've been arranged, but we create the moment. And if black man, we would ever stand up, not in no arrogance, not that I'm a bad MF, but in the humility of our causality, we would put aside all the foolishness that we suffer from in this country. Black men has to stand up and realize who we are. We be. We be. And the law says that in every law there's a moral mandate. There's a moral obligation for its fulfillment. And the moral if the divine law is to be, we are indestructible, we are invincible. If that's our divine law, what is the moral mandate? The ancients wrote Ancients wrote and they said the moral mandate is that if you be, you must become better.
Yes, sir.
If you be, you must become more better. So what you be today, you must be more better tomorrow. And look at what we do, black men. Look at what we do. One easy, simple example. A white genius, white man sitting on his farm thinking and relaxing and looking at the fact that he brought all the apples in, they've been processed, he got some money. He looks at an apple crate and imagines what he could do with the apple crate. He takes his foot and kicks out the bottom of the apple crate and nails it up on the wall. Takes some old rags. This is genius. Genius. He's inventing something that's never been done before. Takes some old rags and begins to throw the old rags in the apple crate. And he invents something called basketball.
Yes, he did.
White man invented it. To more better people, come along. Black men ain't in this now. They ain't in this. The rule is bounce the ball, step, stop, and shoot. That's the rule. Bounce the ball, step, stop, and shoot. That's the rule. Blood comes in and says, hey, this could be more better than this. This could be more better than this. And brother literally begins, and you know them, the Jordans and the Kareems and the brothers who begin to walk backwards in the air and shoot the ball. Shoot the ball. And the black man shoots the ball not because he's athletically superior. He engages in the instinctual process of managing and mastering the divine law of the universe. He understands the physics. He understands the physics. So when he throws the ball walking backwards in the air, he don't look up and say, oh, it went in. Therefore, in a pristine Aristotelian nomological deductive reasoning, I conclude that I did good. Brother walks back there. Come on, Lord. Because he understands. He understands instinctually that it is the nature of the black man to be more better. It is the nature of the black man to be more better. You look at the brother who was the astronaut that went up into space and was killed, Ronald McNair. Ronald McNair literally sat at his table and was solving physics problems and blowing a saxophone at the same time. The black man you need to look at. It ain't no black man that's sitting around talking about I can't. It is a black man who recognizes that the moral mandate is to be more better. To be more better. It is a black man who looks at the sister.
Yes, sir.
Looks at the sister, and if he's foolish, doesn't read the sister, no, there's no way, no play.
Yes, sir.
He may keep on going with it. But the real black man understands that when there is that complementarity, he don't need to be talking about flashing his cash.
That's right.
He simply leans over to the sister. Leans over to the sister. And says to her, hey, baby. More better. More better. He understands that in becoming more better, he engages in. He engages because the ancestors taught us, even though we didn't read it, it's in our instinct. Instinct is an important part of the psychological process. Instinct allows you to do that which you were not taught, and it is right on time in time. Instinct teaches the plant to turn toward the sun when the light is in the left. Instinct teaches the plant to dig its roots down deep when the water is low. Instinct teaches the black man to understand how to relate to his woman. It is only when you've been rearranged that you get foolish. Only when you've been rearranged you don't understand that in becoming more better. In becoming more better, the ancestors taught us that there is an alchemical process of transformation. That we must go through an alchemical process of transformation of moving from a lesser material being to a greater spiritual being. That's our alchemical process. The affirmative footnote, the affirmative action children went along and were taught the alchemical process of transformation to perfectibility. But they went back talking about alchemy. They went back talking about the task here is to change a lesser material into a more valuable material. To change lead into gold. To change, you chant on it, you pee on it, you cry over it, you ring bells around, you do anything you can to try to change one material into another more valuable material. And what do we do as black men? We believe that our value is in our material transformation. I tricked the sister. I took the sister. Naim just say, Naim, tell the girl that I work for the governor. Material change. Or if the sister's wearing some dreadlocks and say, name, tell the girl, tell her, that's Nubian sister, tell her, I'm from Africa. And so we engage in all kinds of changing of the material condition when the ancestors said, taught us, wrote down that it is your nature to move not from material to material, but to move from material to spiritual. We believe that we go and sit up here at the University of Cincinnati and we get a degree in something, we are more valuable. It ain't more valuable. We got sisters running around talking about, I can't talk to that brother. He drives the bus. That's material. That's material. We got sisters walking about, I think I'm going to broaden my opportunities and horizons. I may start dating white men, because there's not enough black men. You also go, no, you want to. No, the fact of the matter is that there are some sisters, not the ones on the third row there, but there are some sisters. There are some sisters who are beginning to make the analysis. And not making the analysis as proper, making the analysis based upon an alchemical change. But the alchemical change is not part of the African worldview. It is part of the mutation, the limitation that came from other people studying our high culture and bringing it to a low culture. We need to understand the alchemical process of transformation to perfectibility. Said we must engage in development of the young child, the young man-child, to a higher spiritual being. And we do that by significant transformations. There's transformation from chaos to order. And I really wish I could have time to tell you about chaos, because that confuses a lot of us. But there's also transformation from disharmony to harmony, from ignorance to intellect, from darkness to enlightenment, from humanity to divinity. Those are our paths. Black men, those are our paths. We need to get on our path. We need to begin to understand that in getting on our path, we make the ultimate transformation from being finite to being eternal, infinite, indestructible. We need to begin to look at this transformation process of perfectibility. The ancients taught us that there are three characteristics of all living things: desire, thought, and action. All living things. I don't care if it's a blade of grass. There's desire, thought, and action. And that the desire, thought, and action, however, are the lesser material conditions. We have to transform them as well. Desire. We here adults, we can talk about the fact of the matter that every black man is womb. When you see a sister, the first thing you deal with is desire.
Yes, sir.
It's desire. We can play them games about, I got a PhD in psychology, and she got a PhD in sociology, and I live in a middle-class community, and she lives in a middle-class community. I teach at the university, and she teaches at the university. Therefore, I can conclude that there's a possibility that maybe if we engage in conversation, that we would develop a meaningful personal relationship. Brother looks at the sister and says, says, girl, even kisses himself, he's so happy going. Then the brother says, I got to move from desire, that's desire, to thought. The thought is, how do I up my ante? I got to figure out how to place an impression on me that will be irresistible. And then you move from thought to action. And the brother says, look at what we do. Watch every movement of our bodies, because that is scripture. That is scripture. Everything we do is scripture. The brother moves, and the brother might say, brother, I think I see something. I think I see something. And my partner in the back will say, I see it too. Then he said, if I was you, I'd go check that out. And then the brother begins to slide, walking on divine air, not even understanding who we are. Now, that all sounds good. But the ancient says that's low-level stuff, black man. That's low-level stuff, because desire has to be transformed to its higher level. That through instruction, through older black men teaching younger black men what it is to be a black man, and black women teaching young black men that it is good to be a black man. That's our relationship. Black woman can't teach no black man how to be a black man. Let me say that again. A black woman cannot teach a black man how to be a black man. A black woman can teach a black man that it is good to be a black man. It is in the complementarity of the how and the reward that I choose to be it. Understand our psychology. Don't go for that old silly stuff that white psychologists teach us. Understand our psychology. So the desire has to move to its higher level, to the alchemical process of transformation that moves to the issue of greater spiritual being. So desire is transformed through instruction, through initiation, through rite of passage, through training to its higher level of pure love. It is the state of pure love that the black man looks at the sister now no longer as body, no longer as that material, physical, wonderful sister who got back. Understand, we ain't talking sexism here. There's a level that people operate from. And that at the desire level, we can say, baby got back. And that ain't nothing about sex, that is just a low level. Then you move to the higher level through training, through education, and the brother looks at the sister. And in the sister, he sees a reflection of that which is best in himself. That's pure love. That's pure love, is that when you move to the higher level, when you move to the spiritual level, then you look at sister and you see reflection. And in seeing reflection, you not only see reflection, you see inspiration. That's pure love. When I look and wake up in the morning, I look at my woman, I realize that the limitations I thought I had last night, I can deal with this morning. But when I have other things and other people, I cannot look and see the same inspiration, because the instinct and the alchemical process is a mental proposition, not a physical one. Not a physical one. As quiet as kept, it is moving to that pure love, where in seeing the sister as a reflection of yourself, you then make the deduction that if I want the best for myself, I must want the best for the sister. If I want to aspire to be the baddest black man in the world, then I expect my compliment and appreciate that she wants to be the baddest black woman in the world. I don't sit around talking about, oh baby, I feel inadequate because I make $30,000 a year and you make $40,000 a year, and somehow it ain't right for the woman to have more money. Fool, you all got $70,000. That's the issue. That's the issue. See, when you begin to understand the complementarity, our sister makes the analysis that I just can't have a black man that does not make as much money or has the same amount of money in his bank book as I have my bank book. Fool, if you got two monies, you got two more betters. You need to begin to understand this understanding in terms of what pure love says. Pure love says you are my divine complement, and in being my complement, you inspire me and I inspire you. We inspire each other to move beyond that which is considered a limitation. Thought is also transformed. The reason why you got folk like me called psychologists is because people can begin to think things that are so abhorrent and so aberrant that they need somebody else to help think them out of it. Let's be clear. There are people who are thinking that it is appropriate for a black man to have sex with his own child, male or female. It don't make no difference. He can think that. And in thinking that, he can engage in it. That's low level. The Africans understood that you can think anything. The task here is not just to think. The task is to move through the alchemical process of transformation to perfectibility, to move thinking and critical thinking to its higher level, which is clear understanding. Clear understanding means that you understand both the outcome and the intent of human processes. You can't say that I'll engage in some old foolish, crazy kind of behavior, some aberrant behavior, and then say, well, if I can just get me, a good black psychologist, maybe I can help me get out of this, that I don't understand why I did that. No, there's some behavior, clear understanding teaches you, there's some behavior that you engage in Now, you all want to hear this, but there's some behavior that you engage in that disqualifies you as being a human being, and you need to be taken off the planet. Now, we need to understand that there are principles that define your humanity, and when you choose to engage in behavior that is antithetical to the nature of your humanity, you can't say, give me some therapy. No, it ain't about therapy today, blood. That's been our tradition. Think about it. Little black girl gets raped in the South, and next day something, I ain't seen Willie. Have you seen Willie? No, his clothes is over there. His plate got some pork chops left on it. I don't know what. He ain't been around. And people talk about Willie for a few days, and after a while, Willie don't matter no more.
That's right.
But little girls are not brutalized in that community.
That's right.
You see, it ain't about Willie. Willie disqualified himself.
That's right.
Disqualified himself. And it is the community that must respond in terms of clear understanding. We cannot engage in certain kinds of things that are hard for us. We have to recognize that we have standards that define us as being at the higher level.
Yes, sir.
Action is, again, the third attribute of living things. And we act. We can do all kinds of things. We do. Black people will do everything. We act and do all kinds of things. But that's the low level. That's the low level. The high level is when you transform your instinct to act to its higher spiritual essence.
Yes, sir.
Its higher spiritual essence says that in the acting, in the perfecting, in the acting, one must engage in acts of sacrifice or service to benefit the whole. That's the higher level. Let me say that again because we need to take this one home. That in what you do, if you have evolved, if you have been transformed, if you have been perfected, then in what you do, in the doing of it, it is an act of sacrifice or service to benefit the whole. Malcolm went through the transformation. He had been rearranged. As a black man, a young black man. But he went through the alchemical process of transformation to perfection, and Malcolm understood that every analysis he made, every step he took, every decision he did, the criteria was, does this act service, sacrifice to benefit black people?
Yes, sir.
That's the transformation. That's the criteria, black man. And you can decide whether you want to be in this gang or not.
Yes, sir.
See, because that's what it is. That if you are going to be a black man, then you must be engaging in behavior that is demonstrating your ability to sacrifice or service that benefits all of black people. It ain't about you individual. You are irrelevant. But in your action, in the higher level, you engage in service and sacrifice to benefit the whole. Martin went through the same transformation. You think about it, Martin was one of those privileged black folk. His daddy had the biggest church in Atlanta. And for a black person in a black community at that time, that sure enough is eating high on the hog.
Yes, sir.
I mean, if your daddy has the biggest church, you literally can do all kinds of stuff that you get away with. Daddy was the biggest church. He had the drop-top BMW of his time, called a 57 Chevrolet convertible. He was cute. He had good clothes. He had an education. All the sisters were looking for him. All the sisters were saying, hey, this is a good catch. And he literally could have exploited sexually, regardless of what his partner had to say. He could exploit it sexually, black women, like there was no end. But he went through the transformation and he recognized that there was a higher calling as long as there was a single black person that did not benefit from the society, that he gave his life in terms of service and sacrifice to benefit the whole. That's the standard. The standard is to recognize that we engage in, we as psychologists, in our analysis. We can't do analysis because somebody thinks that's cute and we get a lot of play for it. In our work, the criteria for judgment of whether we are good black psychologists, whether we are better black psychologists, is in our work. Does our work provide service and sacrifice that benefits all of black people? It's not enough to have your name on the book. It is that in reading the book, the African community is able to see service and sacrifice that gets us out of the quagmire that we find ourselves in. It is that notion of alchemical process of transformation to perfection that we must engage in and realize that it came at the beginning of time. Our ancestors always talked about transformation transformation. Talked about being more better. Talked about how bad we were. In the book of Knowing the Evolutions of Ra, the God never to change. God talking about us. Because the creation of the birth of the gods in the Genesis myth, in our Genesis myth.
Yes, sir.
Hear me now, our Genesis myth. The book of Knowing the Evolutions of Ra, it is said, I am he who evolved himself under the form of the god Khepera. I, the evolver of the evolutions. That's a bad black man. I, the evolver of the evolutions.
Yes, sir.
I what makes things happen here. I am the creative cause. I, the evolver of the evolutions and the developments which came forth from my mouth. It's what you say, black man. You can't walk down the street and see your sister and say, what's happening, bitch? It's what you say, the evolutions that come from the developments of your mouth. It's your mouth that is important because in our tradition, it is the nomo, the power of the word that makes itself manifest. It is other people who took our Genesis myth and began to say, in the beginning, there was the word.
Yes, sir.
They got that from us. It is us who said that the evolutions and developments came forth from my mouth. No heaven existed and no earth and no terrestrial animals or reptiles had come into being. I'm it. I'm the beginning of this thing. I found no place whereupon to stand. I was alone. I didn't have no white philanthropist backing me up.
Well,
He said, I was alone, and the God's shoe and test nut had not come forth from me. There existed none other who worked with me. I laid the foundations of all things by my will, and all things evolved themselves therefrom. It is your will, black man. I laid the foundations of all things by my will. I united myself to my shadow and set forth shoe and test nut. Out of myself,
yes, sir.
thus became three. Our Holy Trinity.
Come on.
It is our Holy Trinity.
Yes.
It is the Spirit that is in us. And I became three. And Shu and Tef Nut gave birth to Nut, and Seb and Nut gave birth to Osiris and Horus and Isis and Nephthys. And at one birth, one after the other, my children multiplied upon this earth. Understand our Genesis myth. Understand where we place ourselves. It is in that understanding that we recognize that the African teaches us that there is a visible and an invisible. There's a spiritual world and a material world. And that the manifestation of the spiritual as material requires a distinction. That's what we do. We make distinction which represents difference or identity, and sameness which represents unicity. So black men and black women are different in the same at the same time.
Yes, sir.
It is in the understanding that now that's not, don't you all run out and think that you can do the same things with each other at the same time. That's not what the prescription calls for here. The prescription calls for the recognition that there is a difference in terms of appreciating the different material manifestation, but at the spiritual level, we are of the same stuff. There's a principle called the ontological principle of consubstantiation. It's that principle, ontological principle of consubstantiation that allowed us to see redemption and rejuvenation and decomposition and polarization as principles in the universe. So we have to take our own prescription here. We can be talking about if we're going to rearrange the arrangement of black men, we do that through our own prescription. And the best prescription, at least the best tale of prescription, comes from the Osiris myth. You all know the myth. It talks about the battle of Osiris and his, in quote, evil brother Seth. Now, I don't know why Seth was evil, but they put this stuff on it, and we run thinking Seth and Satan, and before you know, we got the black devil here. I mean, no, that's not what it's about. The battle of Osiris and Seth had to do with the fact that there was a natural state in the black man. And the natural state is harmony. And that when you have disharmony, you have to do battle with that which disharmonizes you.
Yes, sir.
Osiris symbolized harmony. Seth, the other attribute of the black man, symbolizes disharmony.
Disharmony.
Hear me now. In the black man, these two attributes, harmony and disharmony, are natures that we can be the basis of harmony in our community, or we can be the essence of disharmony in our community. And that's a struggle. So the ancients wrote in mythical terms this struggle of Seth and Osiris fighting each other. And Seth literally kicked Osiris' butt.
Yes, sir.
Now he kicked him, but he pulled a knife on him, like black men sometimes will do. He pulled a knife on the brother and cut him up.
Cut him up.
Cut him up, like we know we can do. And once he cut him up, he scattered his body, his piece of body, all over the world. Enters the black woman. Enters the black woman. And it is Aset, Isis, in her sister. Now, we have problems talking about sisters, two sisters dealing with the same man. Be careful now. But hear the myth. It was a black woman working with her sisters, two black women together, seeing that it was important for them to engage in the reconstitution of the harmony in black manhood. What did they do? They gathered all his pieces that they could find. They gathered all his pieces, they put them together. The first thing they did, two sisters, is put together the skeleton in order. Here's a message for us. Our communities must be characterized by order. You don't allow everything in your community. If you're reconstituting the black man must be a symbol of order. It is the skeleton that represents order. The bones all connected together. The second thing they did was they purified his flesh through ritual. We need to reclaim our rituals. Reclaim those things that allow us to say that you are a different kind of being once you're going through this thing. We don't allow you to do the same things that you used to do. Then they reunited the separate members of his bones. They put tendons, connected up the hand and the elbow and the shoulder, connected up the neck and the shoulder. They put the members together, and then finally, but they revived his corpse. How did sister do that? She transformed herself into a bird and hovered over the brother as he laid on his back and gave him a kiss.
Well,
come on, black woman. Yeah. Understand the nature of the male-female relationship. It wasn't just being against the missionary position. Yeah. That's what it was about. It was recognizing that in hovering over the reconstructed body of the black man, harmony happens in the black community when the black woman and the black man transmit their spiritual energy. Give the blood a kiss. And in giving him a kiss, she recalled his soul. Symbolically, she reclaimed our culture. Hear me. That when there was disharmony, or when the black man had been rearranged, pieces thrown all over the place, not being connected, not knowing what his purpose and path in life is about. It was the instinct of the black woman to come to the rescue and put him back together, because the black woman understood that the necessities of harmony in our community is that the black man as the foundation must be in order, must have flesh, be purified, must have members that allow him to engage in motion, sometimes meaning fight and war, must also revive his corpse, and reviving his corpse recalls the soul of his culture. That is the reconstruction process that we must engage in and look at in terms of our issue as the radical reformation of the black man. So the black man's reformation cannot exist in isolation of the black woman.
That's right.
Together, we must engage in that transmission of the spiritual force. And in the transmission of the spiritual force, recall our culture. That, as quiet as kept, is what the Afrocentric movement is about.
Listen.
That's what the Afrocentric movement is about, because the Afrocentric movement is not just about some fool saying that black people want black ice because black ice is colder than white ice.
Well,
I mean, that's foolish. We are people who understood the divine law, understood the natural divine law. And so ice is ice. But what we understood is that in the Afrocentric movement is that we must ascribe to a belief system. And that belief system tells us that there is a distinct universal African worldview. Part of what I just laid out for you. There's a distinct universal African worldview which must be the foundation upon which all African things are inscribed. I don't care whether it's spiritual, you Baptist, whether it's psychology, you a Jungian, whether it's intellectual, whether it's social, whether it's political, whether it's economic, whether it's artistic, whatever the domain of engagement is, Afrocentric thought teaches us that the foundation of that engagement must be centered rooted in the universal African worldview.
That's right.
The second thing the Afrocentric movement argues for is and advocates for the restoration of the African character. And that's important for us to realize. It ain't about self-esteem. It ain't about feeling good. It ain't even about wearing nice, wonderful, beautiful African clothes.
Right.
It is about the restoration of the African character, because history teaches us that every time African men and women create an environment that is consistent with African character, we see high culture. The moment we engage in other kinds of experiments called integration or domination or whatever, we see a diminishment of our high culture. And so if high culture is associated with African character, it seems to me the prescription teaches us that we must restore the African character.
That's right.
Restore the African character. And thirdly, we must engage in the recognition that the precondition for the liberation of the African mind, for African liberation, is the liberation of the African mind.
That's right.
If you don't think like an African, you can't do like an African. If you don't think like an African, you can't be an African. That we can act, but we won't be. And it is to be. Remember, to be is the divine law, and the moral man is to become. It is that African character that is important, that we recognize that it's comprised of something. And I'm a little frustrated out for time, but let me just take 1 or 2 more minutes and I'll finish. The African character tells us that there are ethical traits that belong to African people from the beginning of time. We must reclaim those. We just not do anything, people. Our ethical traits are established in virtue. And the virtues that are most important in the African tradition, that are uncontaminated, are the 7 cardinal virtues of Ma'at. African men and women stand on truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, propriety, and order. Those are our virtues. So we're engaging in male-female relationships. They need to be talked about in terms of truth, in terms of righteousness. It is in fact the case that the truth is so ingrained in us that all of us know that the one thing you never do, that you never did, was allow your mama or your daddy to catch you in a lie.
That's right.
They can say, baby, you was stealing, and I feel bad because I didn't have enough money and you was hungry. I forgive you. But Lord, don't let mama catch you in a lie. I mean, that's the one thing that triggers instantaneous, momentary insanity in black people. I mean, you remember your mama, she starts stuttering, she starts agitating, she starts looking for something, she's going to hit you with you, she just goes all over the place because you lied. Now, in some culture, they would say a rose by any other name smells just as sweet. But in our culture, if it's a rose, you better call it a rose. Don't lie about it. Don't lie to me. Justice, part of our virtues. It is the ancestral virtue of justice that drove all our political so-called civil rights movements. It wasn't just about getting a piece of the pie. It was that there was a profound objection to injustice. Why would these people in South Central LA come up instinctually with a slogan that captured the moment? No justice, no peace.
That's right.
They could have said no jobs, no grits. I mean, they could have said, they could have said anything. You see what I'm saying? Look at what people do. Look at the choices they take, the chances they take. And you will read their scripture. The scripture is that justice was a virtue that is instinctually in us. Righteousness, right conduct. Our community always talks about right conduct. Do the right thing. It's not something that Spike Lee made popular. It's ingrained in our ancestral virtue. Balance, harmony, propriety. Propriety. When we were growing up, black men would sit in the corners, so-called bums and derelicts, drinking out of bottles, old nasty wine bottles, sometimes scratching themselves, saying vulgar words. When the sister came by, the bum, the derelict would say, "Oops, excuse me, ma'am." Because the bum understood right conduct. The bum understood that the male principle always gives deference to the female principle. The bum understood that the male principle always sits in awe of the feminine principle. Right conduct, that's our way. Propriety, that's our way. Values are part of our ethical traits. Values, respect for elders, that's our way. But respect for elders is always complemented with responsibility for the young. That's why that's why all of us had that wonderful, illustrious moment when Big Mama told Mama to shut up and leave that child alone. You all applaud that because you know. Think about the wonderment of that. Mama is the master master of the universe. Mama is the determiner of life and death in your house. And when you go to Big Mama's house and Mama's getting ready to whip you behind, Big Mama puts her hands in the way and says, child, leave that child alone. And you internalize in your psychological temple, your psychological computer, that Mama got a mama. That Mama got a mama. And you recognize that eldership has a responsibility for the young. And that your mama says, as long as you in this here house, you do what I say do. And we recognize that there is a hierarchy that is divine, not based upon domination and exploitation of the high to the low, not the class analysis that Milan's talking about, that our responsibility, that our hierarchy has to do with the high being responsible for bringing the low up to the high, for raising those valleys that Rev talked about last night. We need to see this is our way. We need to begin to recognize that our character is based upon mental traits. We do have a psychology, and that black people think differently. We feel differently. We even conceptualize the world differently, and we need to begin to explicate that and not be ashamed of that. We need to understand the attitudes of the sense of appropriateness, the sense of excellence. We need to understand the issues of humility as being a value for people. We need to understand the attributes of mastery of one's own thoughts. That's why your father would tell you as a young girl, when you go out here, keep your dress down and your panties up.
That's right.
So don't go talking about, no, he told me if I love him, I'll give him some. He said, that's foolishness. You have a responsibility. And we taught our children that. And we didn't just talk to girls, we taught young brothers. Our brothers, when you go out here, understand, child, don't you let the little head rule the big head. You got a responsibility. You can't say, oh, I got so excited, I had to take me some.
Yes, sir.
No, that don't play in our community. Take you to the well. That don't play in our community. You have a responsibility for what you do. Mastery of one's own thoughts and mastery of one's own behavior was our way. We can look at this and see that African universal worldview is part of our tradition. Well, it's part of our tradition from the beginning of time. Wherever you find African people, you can look at North Africa and see the ancient Kemetic people. And we've talked about that worldview as our moon, the power of God being in us, the generating capacity. You can look at South Africa, you see the Bantu people, and we talked about into the force of God being in us. You can look at Central Africa and see the Dogon people, and we talk about Nomo, the vital force represented by the word in us. You can look at West Africa and see the Akan people. We talk about Kra as being a divine breath, the kiss of Isis. You can look at the Yoruba, talk about Iwa, the essential nature of African men and women. You can look at North Africa and North America and see the Busa people. The Busa people who say that the essence of being is heart. The Busa people, black in the USA.
Hello.
And we say that the black man, when he shows his nature, has heart.
Hello.
In our generation, when you back down a sucker off you, they said blood got heart. When you stood up and challenged white folk, we said blood got heart, because there's essential nature that represents the same thing, from the power of God to heart in black men. Yes, you got to have heart, black man. You got to have heart which has courage. The courage that allowed us to build the Great Pyramids. The courage that allowed us to recognize that there's a process of transformation that comes from our way that is based upon certain attributes that says the meaning of manhood is not only biological, but it is also metaphysical. It is not only metaphysical, it is also psychological. It is not only psychological, but ultimately the manhood is spiritual. That it is our meaning of manhood that we must reclaim if we are to challenge the rearrangement of black men. It is a task of attitude that we must engage in. It is the reinvention of those rituals and practices that become part of the growing up of being black men. What's your responsibility for birth? It ain't just making a baby. What's the black man's responsibility? What's our responsibility for brotherhood and fatherhood? They have to be prescribed. They can't be chancy. You can't be saying, well, I think I'm going to make my child support payment this month. No, there's a responsibility that's prescribed that other black men must hold black men accountable to. It ain't the welfare system. It is other black men that says to black man, you got a responsibility. We need to understand the rituals and practices associated with marriage, with familyhood. We can't can't engage in this dabbling on the outskirts of illegality that we want to call polygamy. We need to look at these issues and begin to talk seriously and openly about what these things mean for service and sacrifice to benefit the whole. We have to understand our role in death. Our role in death. Think about this one last moment. That when your father dies in the Kemetic tradition, it was the male child's responsibility to prepare his body, not the undertaker, to prepare his body for the afterlife. Because in preparing your father's body, you made a commitment to continue to communicate with him in the afterlife. You made sure that blood had all he needed in the afterlife. You just said, well, he didn't have no insurance, I don't know what I'm going to do. No, you oiled his body, you cleaned his body, you chanted and prayed for his trek to the afterlife. So we need to become to reinvent those ceremonies and celebrations that are tied to our way. Ceremonies about respect for higher order, recognition of achievement, reward for accomplishment, deference to, veneration to the ancestors and reverence for the divine. We need to begin to look and talk about what are our roles and responsibilities as black men in every aspect of human life. And in doing that, we will begin to reclaim the antidote to the rearrangement. We'll be able to answer those questions that Milana talked about in terms of who am I really who I am, and am I all I ought to be? And in the last question, when we ask, am I all I ought to be? If we are true black men, we will always say no. Because we can be the baddest black man today, but tomorrow we've got to be more better. We've got to be more better. And in doing that, we ultimately recognize that every process ends in a product, even though the process never ends. Every process ends in a product, even though the process never ends. And the process we have to engage in this world is to begin to produce black men and black women who have attributes that we deem as part of our tradition and consistent with our worldview. In doing that, we will produce black men and women who have the competence of a W.B. Du Bois and a Mary Bacal Bethune, the confidence of a Muhammad Ali and a Wilma Rudolph, the consciousness of a Malcolm X and a Yahya Santawa, the defiance of an Elijah Muhammad and a Rosa Parks, the discipline of a Charles Drew and a Josephine Baker, the duty of a David Walker and a Mary Church Terrell, the intelligence of a George Washington Carver and Evelyn Boyd Granville, the devotion of a Ramses II and the Kandaki Queen of the Moreau, the commitment of a Martin Luther King and a Harriet Tubman, the ability to contribute one's material resources to benefit the whole of a Bill Cosby and a Madam C.J. Walker, the integrity of a Paul Robeson and a Zora Neale Hurston, the courage of a Nat Turner and a Sojourner Truth, and ultimately the character of Imhotep and Hatshepsut. Hotep.